costly to produce milk in Ireland at the moment. Not the farmer's fault. That's inflation. When labour and energy are high in an economy, everything will be dearer. So we have to take control back as much as we can. And the figures have shown some people can do it cheaper than other people. So why is that? And what can I do to get myself back in line?
The financial landscape for dairy producers has been substantially altered during the last 3 to 4 years, with unprecedented fluctuations in both dairy product prices and also costs of inputs. I'm joined by Patrick Gowing, Teagasc Dairy Specialist, to discuss the recent trends in production costs over the last number of years and the drivers of profit on Irish dairy farms. Thanks for joining us, Pat.
No problem at all, James. Thanks for having me.
So, Pat, I think you presented a paper recently at the Teagasc Ballyhaise Open Day, and in that paper there was a piece of analysis done looking at the kind of cost trends and also in terms of the drivers of profit and what was driving profit on Irish dairy farms over the last number of years. Can you maybe explain a little bit in terms of what you were actually looking at within that piece of analysis?
Yes, James, no problem. Yeah, so we did two parts, I suppose, James. The first part was all the data is used from the Teagasc Profit Monitor system. We looked at the costs and the margins in a direct comparison of 2015 against 2023. So I suppose just to see where we were, where we are now, and can we see anything within that? We used Teagasc spring calving herds for that. The second part then, which was probably the main part of the board and the paper, was an analysis of 2023, looking at low and high margin farms to see what was causing or what was making farmers more profitable, or could we see any trends within that? So I suppose there was two main parts to the paper, James.
And that first piece, maybe to start there, trends and costs, and you mentioned it over that kind of 8-year period. What did you see? I think we all know kind of from that 2022 in terms of where input cost was, but that's a longer period. So what did you see over that span? Yeah,
so as I said, it's a direct comparison. So this is not averages. So it's basically what happened in 2015 and what happened in 2023, just to see. And I suppose the first one is the gross output. So your gross output is your milk sales, stock sales, and a small bit of inventory change. And in 2015, the farmers averaged over 36 cent a litre. And that increased in 2023 to 48.22. So basically for every litre they sold on average in 2023, they received 48.22 cent a litre. And that's an increase of 32%. So on average gross output from 2015 compared to 2023 was up 32%. And I suppose that's the easy part of it, James. And as we all know, costs have increased. So we also did analysis of that. And I suppose I'll just go through the few main ones we found, James, if that's okay.
Mm.
Yeah, so the first one obviously is feed. So feed was 4.49 cent a litre, and that doubled to 9.04 cent a litre, so an increase of 100%. And what we've noticed there, I suppose, is it's obviously unit price increase, but also usage. So the average usage is sort of creeping up annually. So we're feeding a bit more than we were, and it's costing a bit more. So that we have that level of increase, which caused a doubling of feed costs in 2023.
You mentioned it there. Reasoning behind that, I suppose, is there anything in the figures? So obviously we know the unit price increases is driving a substantial amount of that, but also you mentioned there about usage increases. Is there anything in the figures, or why is that? Why is there more concentrate being fed maybe now than there was previously?
I suppose when we look in it, as I said, the unit price is the easy one to explain. The usage is sort of gradually creeping up every year, and there'll be in any year there'll be you could have higher or lower amount depending on weather patterns. So obviously in 2018 you would have seen a higher usage, but the general trend would be for an increase, I suppose. Maybe as farmers stocked up, they are probably struggling. Maybe over the last number of years, there's a period in any year that where the grass growth is not maybe meeting the demand, maybe slightly too heavily stocked. and they're falling back on a feed. Now, the feed figure there would also include purchased fodder, so you would see that an increase in purchased fodder as well coming through. So maybe the farms are getting it hard just to be self-contained and self-fed. And also with that, which was the next cost we're going to go to, James, I suppose it was, if we just look at the fertilizer was 3.29 cent a litre. And we all had the big talk of fertilizer, particularly in 2022 when it went to €1,000 a tonne and the like. That's only increased by 15% to 3.81 cent a litre. And you could nearly say that it's the reverse to the feed there. So fertilizer, the unit price has increased, but the usage is down. And I know we all have allowances and that we have to stick to, but if we look at the trends over the last number of years, PK, nitrogen are falling every year, particularly since 2022. And you'd ask the question: are we over conservative with our allowances? Not maybe using our allowance the best we can, not growing the amount of grass, and then relying on purchased fodder and feed to fill the gap. And it's the more expensive way to feed your cow. So I would say one of the trends you would see there, James, is we need to have a rebalance, if you like, of the fertilizer and feed, by maybe investing that a little bit more and using our allowances in the fertilizer. We can reduce our feed costs, which would be a cheaper way to do it. So spend a little bit here to save more over there, if you know what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, absolutely. And then the other costs, was that it? I suppose we think of the feed budget costs and they're a fair chunk of that, or was there creep in the other costs as well?
Yeah, if we just move on, like without going through them all, I suppose, but the total variables were 14.34 cents a litre, and they increased to 22.82. So you can see the feed was a largest proportion of that increase, and what you'll see is creep on all the rest of them, as you say, which is basically agri-inflation, things being a little bit dearer now, obviously, than they were in 2015. So you're getting an increase of 59% on variable costs, mainly driven by the feed cost. But as you say, with all the other costs getting dear as well. And we'll see a similar trend in fixed costs. So fixed costs in 2015 were 10.41 cent a litre, and they went to 14.57 cent a litre in 2023, an increase of 39%. And one with the other, then what you have is the average cost of production in 2015 was 24.75, and that increased to 37.39, so over 37 cent a litre, an increase of 56%. So there's a lot. And again, if you were to break down the fixed costs, and we have more of analysis of that in the next section, unit price increase was a lot of it. Diesel, insurance, labour, land, interest rates, ESB, they've all increased in unit price from 2015 to 2023, and that has loaded up the fixed costs on farms. There was obviously depreciation was the other element of it, particularly on the fixed costs, because there was more investment post-quota, and that's in the figures there now as well.
So, as you said at the outset, in terms of just over a 30% increase in gross output, which when you look at it in isolation, you'd say is a very positive thing, but it struggled in 2023, obviously, to keep up with those cost increases over that period.
So like, I suppose there's two things, and if we bring it back down to it, the margin, the net margin in 2015 was 11.61 cent a litre. 2023 was 10.83 cent a litre, back 7%. So similar margin, you could call it, or €640 cow in 2015 net profit, and just over 600 in 2023. I suppose there's two things to look within that, and I suppose one is, decisions around expansion and things like that in 2015 were based on profitability of €600 cow. We still achieved a similar type of profitability in 2023. The other thing you would say there, James, too, is 2015 wasn't a particularly good year, and neither was 2023. So, you're comparing an average or below average year with a below average year, and I think that's important. Obviously, if you compared 2015 with 2022, the figures would be totally reversed. But that's the data we decided to go with. And what probably is hidden in within the figures there as well is there's extra cows in the system. And I suppose there is that question mark, were we right or wrong to expand? And the extra cows have generated extra profit. So, the extra cows have created this extra profit, which meant overall the farms were more profitable because there was more cows on the farm. at a similar profitability. So the total profit of the farms increased. And that was very important, I think, particularly when, look, if you pick up any paper there now, they'll talk about the cost of living crisis and inflation and things like that, that these extra cows generated extra profit that was required for the household and helped the household handle a lot of that inflation that we're seeing in the economy in general.
The second part of that analysis, the high versus low margin farms, and I suppose the drivers of profit. Explain to us what you did there and what exactly were you looking for?
Yeah, so as I said, we got a data set. We wanted to get data set of farmers who were very comfortable with all the figures and things. So we decided to pick Teagasc discussion groups who were doing profit monitor. So that was the group of farmers we wanted to work with as such from in the group. So we pulled them down into a report. Within that, then there was about 780 farmers. So a good representation of what's out there, I suppose. We then looked at data and tidied it up a bit. So obvious mistakes, missing data, and we ended up with a pool of 720. And I think it's important now. We didn't go in and you can keep manipulating the figures to get what you want. Like, we just took out obvious mistakes and left the data as it was. And then what we did was we ranked it on one thing only, which was profit per cow. Now, you could use profit per hectare, but the stocking rates were very similar across the set. So we just used profit per cow for handiness. And it was only ranked at that, so there was no mismatching. And I suppose it's important to say that, like, or if a farmer looks at his co-op performance report, and you're comparing yourself against the top 10% in your co-op, that's done by each individual category. So it's the top 10% on milk solids. That's one farmer, and it could be a different farmer. So you get this sort of fictional top 10% farmer over on the right-hand side because it's done by each line. And we didn't want to do that because you create this non-existent farmer. So we went, who are the most profitable farmers? And what are they doing? And that's the way we did it. And I think that's important. So there was, we just went, who are the top 70 or 80 farmers in the data set, top 10%, and what makes them more profitable? And we compare them against the bottom 10% and what made them least profitable. So that's how we set it up, James.
And what have you seen? What did that say to you?
So I suppose the average profitability was about €620 per cow. So very similar to the original figures we used that we discussed there a minute ago. And I suppose one of the key messages, averages are great, very useful for the likes of you and I to be able to discuss. But the variance or the range within the figures is unbelievable, I suppose. And when we look at the key one was the top 10% on profitability made €1,180 per cow in 2023. So there was a cohort of farmers that had quite a good year in 2023, even though 2023 was a tough year. And if you look at the bottom 10%, they made average €40 a cow. So there was €1,140 per cow difference in profitability between the top 10% and the bottom 10% in the data set we worked with. And to put that in context, I suppose, James, that's over 100,000 or over 110,000 on a 100 cow herd. So there's a massive variance in the profitability between the two systems. So then we went in to see what was the difference between the two of them. So it's easy enough to break it down, I suppose. Half the difference, over €570, came from gross output, which we'll explain in a second. So that's the top 10% had a higher gross output, more milk sales basically than the bottom 10%. And if you were to compare them against the average, it's about half that again. So, the figures stack up all the way along. And the other half is on cost control. So half it's on cost control and half it's on gross output. And I suppose we'll deal with them separately. If we look at the cost side of it, which was again the other half, the €570 per cow against the top and bottom 10%, we would normally explain, or I suppose if we were at a discussion group meeting or something like that, there's a large focus on feed and fertilizer and how you feed your cow, and rightly so, because it's a high proportion of the overall cost. But it didn't account for a lot of the difference in the costs between the top and bottom 10%. Actually, very, very similar amounts of feeding. So they both fed over 1.1 ton of dry matter per cow. So there was no difference in feeding per cow. They spent the same amount of money on fertilizer. So there's very little difference on fertilizer. And if you even to look at then on purchase forage, they actually spent the exact same amount of money on purchase forage, like buying silage or whatever other forage they brought in. So if we look at them side, that didn't explain the difference in cost control. It was very minimal. And even if you were to go and look and say, well, look, maybe the top 10% had all their owned land and the bottom 10% hadn't, that only explained about 7% of the difference. Most of the difference came in costs like veterinary, ESB, contractor costs, machinery costs, labour costs. And I would say a lot of them could be explained or could be controlled better by the farmer. And if we just took veterinary, for example, the average cost per cow on the profit monitor on veterinary is €89 a cow in 2023. So that's the average. But we're seeing the range from being €50 a cow to up to nearly €150 a cow. So there's a massive difference in what farmers are doing on farm in that cost alone. And again, you might say that, I suppose when you're doing a per cow base, it doesn't sound too bad, but you multiply that out by the number of cows, it can come into quite a significant difference in a bill. And I suppose that what we'd be saying to the farmers is, there's always if there's a genuine reason, I suppose, why a cost is high. Anyone can have a bad year, particularly on a veterinary type thing. Something went wrong. You had to do more vaccines, or there's a cell count issue, whatever it is. That's fine once it can be explained. But if you're consistently above the average, are you doing the right thing? Is there something you shouldn't be doing? Is there money you're spending on things that you shouldn't be spending on because you're not getting the response to them? And I suppose the challenge we give to farmers is, where are you compared to the average from a benchmarking point of view, and explain the difference. And if you can't explain the difference, then you need to change it. Now, we're all grown adults. Like, if you choose not to change it, ignore it, that's fair enough too. It's your own farm, but it will decrease your profitability. Another example, James, I suppose, would be ESB. A massive range in ESB costs, and sometimes that can be explained by there's two houses on it, the parents' house and the home house. That's fine. That's maybe part of the deal of the handing down of the farm. And sometimes it's just explained by they're paying too much on a unit price. And that needs to be changed. So again, we need to look at that, and there's metrics there. And what Teagasc are hoping to develop is actually a template of what the amount of units of stuff that you do bring into the farm, like ESB, how much, there's a figure for units of energy per 100,000 litres of milk, and to bring that through so that you can compare to that and see where your costs are. The last one, I'd say another big one on that is contractor, machinery, and depreciation, running costs of machinery. Machinery costs and depreciation costs, particularly on machinery, increased rapidly in 2022. So basically, people had a very good year in 2022. Decided to invest on the farm, maybe upgrade the tractor or whatever it was. I have no issue with that at all. But I suppose with all these things, that sometimes if there's additional machinery brought in to do the work yourselves, the contractor cost should fall back in line by the same amount. So we're seeing a sort of a mismatch of balances there of maybe like machinery, labour, contractor costs, like, that sometimes we're high in them all, which it shouldn't really be like. So there needs to be a look at all costs. And I'd say, to me, every farmer needs to benchmark. Every farmer needs to look at the costs and see where they are against the average and fix it. Because
it's interesting, Pat, because it's been, I suppose, as you say, we all talk about the feed budget costs and input costs increases there, and we maybe would have expected before you looked at this piece of analysis to say, well, sure, look at, feed and fertilizer are going to be driving a lot of the differences, but that's not the case. So probably re-emphasizes the point that we need to maintain a level of cost control within our farm businesses, and some of those smaller costs, as you say, when you count them up, they count in significant amounts of money over an annual period.
Yeah, and it was a surprise to me, James, as you said as well. I would have, I suppose, particularly look in 2022, the feed and fertilizer costs went very, very high. So there was a large focus on, rightly so, and maybe we took the eye off the ball on the other costs. Maybe, look, every year since 2018, so you go 18 to 19, 19 to 20, 20 to 21, 22, every year the profitability was increasing. So the system was fairly robust and strong. What we're after seeing now is, obviously 2022 was a great year. 2023, the milk price dropped, as we all know, but the cost didn't drop in line with it. 2024, the costs haven't dropped either. So you're talking about three high cost years in a row there between 22, 23, and 24. But in only 1 year did the milk price really justified the higher cost. So maybe there was a little bit of, the milk price was taken care of, the money was there, and maybe we all just took the eye off the ball a bit, and we have to refocus.
Mm-hmm. The gross output perspective, then, you said they're feeding the same level of feed, same level of purchase forage. So, what were the gross output differences, and where was it coming from?
Yeah, so I suppose we looked at it, and to go back down, so two parts of it, I suppose, James. To keep it simple, one was milk price. There was, I think it was about over 4 cent a litre difference between the top 10% and the bottom 10%. So basically higher milk solid cows delivering a higher milk price, and achieving higher gross output because of that. And that's nice to see. I think, James, we can't take a negative out of that, because that's showing the value of the work farmers have put into breeding and high EBIs. Obviously, there's having the right type of cow calved at the right type of time. So the breeding element of that has been shown in the gross output. And I think that's very important. I also think that's a positive to the people maybe achieving the lower milk price, because if someone else is doing it and are able to deliver these higher milk prices through breeding and grazing management, there's no reason why you can't achieve that over time as well. So I take that as a positive, that the system is working and it's delivering for farmers. The second part of it then, which was the other half, so half of it nearly was accounted for by milk price, which you would affiliate to the genetics in the herd and calving at the right time and so forth on. The next half of it then was how you fed the cow, and I suppose the simplest way to put that is there was no free energy. So they fed the same amount of meal, purchased the same amount of fodder, but got a higher output, sent more kilos of milk solids, and I think it was equivalent. It was over 500 kilos of milk solids, 5, 10, 12 kilos of milk solids for the top 10%, and it was 440 kilos of milk solids for the bottom 10%. So there was about 70 kilos of milk solids in the difference. So that doesn't appear out of somewhere. Cow has to be fed to deliver that. That's how you fed the cow. And we went down and looked at it. Basically, the top 10% put more grass through their cows, because they're stocked similarly, fed the same amount of meal. So the only difference is their own grass and their own silage that went through their own cows. And that was explained a lot of the difference. So they basically better fed their cows by putting more grass through them. It wasn't by pulling more nuts through the cow. It was by putting more grass through the cow. And that extra grass allowed for extra production. And the difference there, I just have it there was about 480 kilos of extra grass, which would become as grazed grass and silage, put through the high margin cows. And if you wanted to put that down over a year, you're talking about only 1.5 kilos more on average for the year. So it's not out there. I suppose the question mark then becomes, James, how do you do that? Which is a longer term question, I suppose. But in reality, you have to grow it first. You can't utilize more grass unless you grow it, which comes back to our original discussion around the nitrogen and the feed balance on the previous data set. So these farmers grew more grass, and because they grew more grass, they utilize more grass. So it comes back to grass utilization being the best indicator of profitability. And they got the cows to eat more through quality. So targeting the right type of grass, being stocked appropriately to get the maximum intake through the cows, growing and having quality silage. All will allow cows to have higher intake, and because cows have higher intake, still perform better. And there was just, sorry, when we did look at it, and it was Joe Patton actually looked at it there, we looked at the relevance of concentrate. So within the data set, what was the response to meal, I suppose? And as the meal feeding increased, on average, the profitability decreased. So, but if you did the flip on that, as you increase your grass into the cow or per hectare, on average, your profitability increase. And it was a very consistent trend there through all that. Now, it's not, there's always one, there always is. But if you look at it over a large data set, you can see the trends within the figures. And again, no different than the breeding. I take a lot of, in the data set, I take a lot of comfort in it. Even though there were some people under a lot of pressure, only made €40 per cow last year. And there is people, and that's going to have a knock-on consequence this year from a cash flow point of view. But the fixes are cheap. You can breed for a better cow. You can change your grazing management relatively simple to increase your grass utilize. You can target better grass covers, all very cheap. And you can look at your costs and see, can you control your costs very simply. The last thing I'd say there, James, before I let you ask a few questions if you want, is that the difference is over €1,000 cow. If you can't get it all, get some of it. So my point being, for whatever, if you save €300 and let half of it come from, you got to increase your gross output by €100 over time by breeding better cows, and you save €200 cow off your cost control. That's 30,000 per 100 cows. So whatever you can get, go get it. And if we can maintain that, if there's an upturn in milk price, and look, milk price is reasonably looking okay at the moment, we will maximize the gain from the high milk price whenever it comes again, if we can get all these things right. And I think that's very, very important to say.
Yeah, and as you said, maybe some people listening to this were expecting some new silver bullet to come out of the analysis, but it's the simple things done well, Pat, is what I'm hearing. Maintaining the focus, as you say, on costs, maintaining that focus on grass and grass quality, and probably grass allowance as well. Just getting that stocking rate right at farm level is a key one as well. And maybe to wrap it up, I suppose, what's your advice to farmers that are listening to this, wanting to do something about it? Like, where's the starting point?
Profit monitor, James, benchmark. The profit monitor is a benchmarking tool to compare your farm operation against your peers. Maybe you can do it in a discussion group level. The first step is to do it. Second step is to have a discussion with your advisor to say, let's have a good, cold, hard look at our my cost of production, my outputs. Is there anything I'm doing wrong? Is there anything I can improve on? And where am I offside? Like, in an ideal world, everything would be 100%, and if it is, sure, no harm done. Secondly, then you can start comparing yourself again. So maybe you're in a discussion group. What are the people in my own area doing? And that's what it is. It's a benchmark to see, can we make more money? Is there something we're doing right? We cannot get a control on our costs unless we know where the money has been spent. So I would say, if any farmer there now at the end of 2023, contact your local dairy advisor, do a profit monitor, do it right, and set a bit aside, time, I should say, aside with your advisor. There'll be half an hour, 40 minutes to go through the results, to understand the results, and see, is there anything within your figures that you can change? And that could be just a list of questions that your advisor would put at you, like, look, your ESB seems to be a bit higher than the normal. Maybe we should have a look at that. Maybe you're feeding a bit too much for your stock, and react to the figures. I suppose that's the other side of it.
It's really about identifying, firstly, those areas that need improvement, and as you said, then doing something about it.
Exactly, yeah. And I think if we get a good base of that and see where we are, it's costly to produce milk in Ireland at the moment. Not the farmer's fault. That's inflation. When labour and energy are high in the economy, everything will be dearer. So we have to take control back as much as we can. And the figures have shown some people can do it cheaper than other people. So why is that? And what can I do to get myself back in line?
Very good. I want to thank Patrick Bowen for joining me on this week's show. Excellent insight and some very sound advice there in terms of what you can do for your own farm to improve margins in the coming years. So, folks, that's it for this week's episode of the Dairy Edge podcast. Don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast. You can listen on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. For more information, go to the Teagasc website at teagasc.ie. I'm James Dunne, and join us next time for your Dairy Edge.